When we left off in our study of Abraham Lincoln, we learned that Abe and a man named Barry had purchased a store in the town of New Salem, Illinois. While Abe was helping to run the store, he purchased a barrel which had a book in the bottom that would help him study to become a lawyer. These types of books were hard to come by in those days, so this really was a great find for Abe. So he took it upon himself to study and to learn while he was running the store. Let's continue our story. In the meantime, Barry took care of the store. But instead of selling the goods, he ate and drank the whole day long, and at last he died. There was Abe with all the debts. It was more than $1,000 he owed. His store was taken away from him, and all that he owned was sold at an auction. Abe's father had taught him, if you make a bad bargain, hug it all the tighter. So instead of running away, Abe stayed and toiled to pay back all the debts. His friends believed in him, and most of all, a girl whose name was Anne Rutledge. She was sure he would become a great man someday if he would just go on with his studies, and then they would be married and be happy ever after. But one day, Anne Rutledge took sick, and nothing could be done to save her life. From that day on, it was as if there were two Abes. The one was happy and full of funny stories, and the other was so sad and sorrowful that no one dared to approach him. But he did his work and finished his studies, and one morning he took leave of his friends in New Salem. He borrowed a horse, and sad and penniless, he rode off to Springfield, the capital of Illinois, to become a lawyer. And here's a picture of poor Abe riding off on his horse to start a new life in a new town. In Springfield, he hitched up his horse on the main square and went into the store of Joshua Speed to ask the price of betting. "I have no money, but if I succeed I'll pay you back," he said to Speed. But Speed felt sorry for sad-faced Abe and told him to take his things upstairs and share his own betting for nothing. From that time on, Joshua Speed was Abe Lincoln's best friend. He took him to the homes of all his elegant friends, and Abe bought himself store clothes, put a stovepipe hat on his head, and by, the country lad was changed into a well-known lawyer. From the prairie all around, people came to ask his advice, for they knew he would be fair and square. And the people in Springfield began to say that the two cleverest men in town were awkward Abraham Lincoln and stylish Judge Douglas. The one was stout and small. The other was lean and tall. And they both courted Mary Todd, a lady from Kentucky. She was dainty and witty, with a tongue so sharp that few people but Abe could tongue-tie her. So here you see, of course, Abe, you recognize him. And this is Judge Douglas. He's going to come later in the story. And then this is Mary Todd. Now, notice it talked about Abe's stovepipe hat. Okay, this is this tall black hat that you see on his head. That was the type of hats that men wore in those days. But Abe Lincoln was well known for wearing that type of hat, even though he was very tall. It made him even taller. "The man I am going to marry will be president of the country," said proud Mary Todd. A few years later, she and Abraham Lincoln were married. They hadn't much to begin with, but Mary saved and helped Abe pay the rest of his debts. Then they bought a house of their own. It was painted white and had green shutters, and there were many rooms with stylish furniture, curtains, and carpets. In a few years, they had 3 noisy little boys who crawled all over Long Abe when he lay reading on the carpet in the parlor. His wife didn't like him to lie on the floor, nor to open the door himself when the doorbell rang. Those were wilderness manners, she said. He should sit on a chair when he read and send the maid to the door, for now he was an important man. All over Illinois, people were talking about him. But Abe milked his own cow, tended his horse, and was a friend of all the children in town. One evening they tied a string across the street, so high up that everyone in town could pass under it, but tall Abe Lincoln with his stovepipe hat. Off flew the hat, and as he always carried his important papers inside his hat, they scattered in all directions. While Abe stooped to gather them, the boys ran out and threw themselves upon him. But Abe only laughed at their pranks. Remember the prank he pulled on his stepmother earlier in his life, and now you see that he also has a good enough sense of humor that he can enjoy a joke on him as well. Here you see him lying on the floor, still reading and studying, and his boys are all around him. Here's a picture of Abe when his hat was knocked off and his papers went everywhere and the boys jumped on his back. Many months of each year he spent driving from courthouse to courthouse out on the prairie. One evening, as he drove along a one-track prairie road, huddled up in his shawl, he met a husky fellow in a buggy. Abe knew that the one who pulled aside risked getting stuck in the mud. "Give way!" he cried. "Give way yourself!" cried the other man. Slowly, Abe rose from his seat. He rose higher and higher till he looked like a giant against the setting sun. "I'll tell you what I'll do if you don't give way," he shouted. "Don't grow any higher," pleaded the other, and drove right into the mud. As Abe passed by, the man asked timidly, "What is it you would have done?" "I would have given way myself," chuckled Abe, as he helped the man. The stranger laughed, and so the judges laughed, and the whole prairie laughed when Abe Lincoln joked. "Abe, you can even make a cat laugh," everyone said. The years passed, and people began to call him Old Abe, but he never changed. When the people of Illinois sent him to Congress, he walked up the Capitol Hill in Washington with his pack of books and a red handkerchief slung over his shoulder. After his term was over, he came home again to Springfield and hitched his horse to his buggy as before and rattled out over the prairie to faraway courthouses. There he sat with his feet on the table and seemed to be asleep. But when his turn came, he stretched himself into shape, ruffled his hair, took off his coat and necktie. Then he began to speak, and everyone listened. There wasn't a man on the wide prairie who hadn't heard of Old Abe. And we will stop there for today, and you're going to color. It's a very tiny picture of Abe chasing his hat and playing with the boys.